Now, here's the defense, Griffin, right? Griffin?
Jim,
I always
Jimmy
screw up
G.
whether it's Jim. Thank you, Jim. I want the second soundbite, team, the one about there's zero evidence to prove he did it. Listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I submit the verdict has to be not guilty. Because there's no reason for him to do it. No reason whatsoever. Now, you've heard a lot of testimony about these financial crimes, misdeeds, and he told you he did it. He told you he did it to support a very expensive drug habit, and none of that's an excuse, but he is an addict, and addiction is real, and addicts lie, addicts cheat, addicts steal to keep getting their drug. The evidence was permitted in this case for you to hear solely to consider, did he murder his wife and son because he had this storm coming, that he was going to be exposed? Is that why he murdered? That's what they say. That's why he murdered. And that's why you're allowed to consider. There was no impending financial doom on June 7th. June 7th was a day which frankly was no different than any other day in the frenetic lifestyle of Alex Murdaugh.
What did you make of that, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jim Griffin focused on the why and the how, and which was most of their case. You know, they had a great relationship. Paul was the apple of his eye. Maggie and him were in love. And I think that the why would he do this to the people he loved the most? Literally, the people that, if you want to say he was stealing money, he would be stealing money to buy things for, as I think some of the evidence has shown. Maggie loved the beach house. He bought the guns for the boys. And I think that to say he committed murder in order to cover up financial crimes or just delay a storm that was coming is pretty hard to believe, especially in the manner that they were murdered. And I think that's where a lot of the defense's focus was, as well as how he could possibly have done it and covered it up in just minutes. And then, of course, they picked SLED apart and how horrible the investigation was throughout. But I think this was part of the why. Why did he do it? We heard a lot about financial crimes, but we didn't hear much about why they would actually commit the murders in the way that he's accused of doing in this case.
Yeah, that's the problem. They did prove he was in a financial meltdown, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And panic. And, you know, Alec tried to rebut that somewhat, but I think they did a great job of proving just how hot it was getting for him on his financial crimes. But then saying, well, that's the motive to kill your wife and your son, who, by all accounts, you did love. It's not like they had a terrible family relationship. That's a tough thing to sell to a jury, even though the timeline, the GPS, the phone records, Alex Murdaugh's lies about where he was on the night in question, including within 3 or 4 minutes of the murders taking place, all of that, I think, would lead any reasonable juror to say, yeah, there's enough proof. But here's a little color. So the prosecutor, it's not the lead prosecutor, but it's John Metters. He did the rebuttal after the defense sat down and said to the jurors a couple of things that I'm just going to highlight. Lead defense attorney Dick Harpootlian is a smokescreen machine. Then he says to your comment about South Carolina law enforcement, I'm offended, he says, that the defense is claiming law enforcement didn't do their job while he, Alex Murdaugh, is withholding and obstructing justice by not just telling us, I was down at the kennels. Yes, I was there within 4 minutes of the murder, 3 or 4 minutes of the murders. Something he kept to himself until he got caught, until witness after witness said, I hear his voice on that tape, his own son. If he goes down for this, his own son fingered him. His own son caught his own murderer by taking that video, which Alec didn't know. They didn't find out until I think it was October of 22 that the son even had the video on his phone because it was locked. They couldn't get into the phone. Alec told his whole story not knowing it existed, and it wasn't until he found out it did that he was forced on the stand to change his testimony. Prosecutor, again, rebuttal saying this case is about being real. Always be real. The case is about that, and the defendant is never real. We don't have to prove motive. I think it's been proven. His world was collapsing. But he says, we don't have to prove motive. That's a little weak there, Peter. When the prosecutor's up there like, we don't even need to prove motive. Well, I mean, like, it's true, but it doesn't really telegraph that you feel strongly about your evidence.
I heard way too much. Maybe he did it like this. Maybe he did it like that. I don't know. He was the only one there. Maybe it was when he was putting one gun down and picking another one up. This is possible. It could have been like this. I heard way too much of that for my liking in a prosecution's closing and rebuttal. And what you just said is exactly right. They know that it's a shaky motive. So they want to make sure that if a juror doesn't buy the motive, they can still convict, because motive is not part of the crime that they have to find beyond a reasonable doubt, even though I think Jim Griffin said that it was. And that's a tough line to walk if you're the prosecutor, because you've taken so much time trying to prove motive. And now to backtrack a little bit and say, well, we don't have to prove motive. And I think
that's like, what do we spend all those days doing it for?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really important. And jurors usually want a motive. Like, all the research shows a jury wants a motive.
And Creighton Waters, in his prosecution closing, framed it. The whole thing, the outline of the closing was motive means opportunity. And so he spent hours on motive just in the closing. So it's not even like he put it into evidence and then later decided to abandon it. He really wants the jury to believe there was a motive. You can question whether he should have just said, who could understand why a double murderer does what he does? Who could possibly get their arms around why a man would murder the wife and son he purportedly loved? We don't have to spend a lot of time on that. How can we know? We're rational human beings. That's why we're not on trial for double murder. But what we do need to prove is that he did it. Here we go, right? And then maybe that would have been a smarter move for him. Here is Prosecutor Metters on the rebuttal, again, trying to clean up what the defense did and said in their closing moments ago.
They're putting these law enforcement on trial, talking about blood evidence, talking about other things that were presented to the grand jury, that blood evidence was investigated and the state didn't offer it. That's what you do in your prosecution. Didn't try to offer it. Now they're trying to put us on trial for doing our job. Think about that. Blame everybody else. Look, they looked into this, and it didn't turn out to be. So now we're going to blame them.
Blame everybody else. He's doing a good job of keeping the jury awake, which apparently yesterday, I don't know about the jurors, but there were reports that counsel at both the prosecution and the defense table were sleeping during the prosecution's original closing argument. But this is the different prosecutor doing the rebuttal, and he's fiery.
Oh yeah, he's got a lot more fire to him than Jim Griffin or Creighton Waters, really. I mean, I think Harpootlian's the more fiery defense attorney at the table, but he seemed like it was a lot for a guy of his age maybe to get up there and do this long closing argument after 6 weeks of testimony. He wanted to split it up. Judge didn't let him. But I think Metters' problem is, I would look at it and say, as someone who's a lawyer in our country, in this criminal justice system, I am nervous that if they can do this bad of an investigation and law enforcement can do this little gathering and testing of evidence and convict somebody of a double murder, I'm a little bit scared of that as a lawyer, who our country is supposed to be protected by laws, and our criminal defendants and accused are supposed to be protected by the presumption of innocence. And it is your job as the prosecutor and the investigators to gather the evidence and prove that he did it. So them being offended that somebody's picking apart a terrible investigation is bad lawyering to me.
So you've heard me talk about Bonner Private Wine Partnership, right? They have these incredibly rare Malbecs that you've got to try. If you enjoy a glass of wine, try these wines from the extreme altitudes of Argentina. The flavor's unlike any other. Blackberry, leather, smoke, little dark cherry in there. And these wines are nearly impossible to get on your own. The producers deep in the Andes Mountains make limited quantities. The best part, they have cut out the middleman, so you are not going to deal with a big markup. Today, we have a great offer for you. If you visit bonnerprivatewines.com/MKS, you will not only get the wine for over 50% off plus free shipping, you'll also get a bonus bottle of small batch, limited production wine from their exclusive wine cellar. That's 4 bottles for the price of 3. It's a deal that's hard to turn down if you're a wine lover like I am. Just visit Bonner, BONNER, privatewines.com/MKS to claim your bonus bottle and become a part of America's most unique wine club. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.